All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next installment of our Friends at HSF Alumni Speaker Series. I first want to thank the FSU Student Alumni Association for their partnership with today's event. We are very excited to welcome our guest today, Kristian Denny, and she is going to be discussing all things crisis management with us. Kristian Denny is a crisis communications professional with nearly 30 years experience, primarily in politics on the national and state levels. Denny founded Maverick Strategies in Mail in 2007 after working many years on the campaign trail and now consults with progressive groups and causes. In the past 10 years, Denny has successfully worked with national candidates, campaigns, and corporations that include Bernie Sanders, Muriel Bowser, and FedEx, among others. Additionally, Denny teaches organizational and crisis communications at the Picker Center for Executive Education in the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University in New York City. Denny is a proud FSU alumna with a BA in English from the College of Arts and Sciences, and she was also a member of the honors program. She is now working with the newly launched FSU Institute of Politics. So we welcome you, Kristian, and we are very happy you are here. Our student moderator for today is Samantha Taylor. Samantha is a junior from Conowingo, Maryland, and majoring in psychology with a minor in social welfare. Samantha enjoys being a member of 2 research labs in the FSU Flying High Circus. So thank you for being here, and I'm now going to hand it over to you, Samantha.
Thank you, Amy, and welcome, Kristian. Before we get started, participants, please feel free to ask any questions in our chat to our hosts, and we will make sure to get to them. I'd like to start by just asking you, Kristian, briefly share a little about your journey through your career and how you've become a seasoned crisis management specialist.
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Amy. Thanks, everyone. This is such a pleasure to be here today. You don't even know. And I'm really nervous for some reason. I guess it's because it's when Knowles are in the room, I work to get their, approval. So bear with me here. But it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much. It's funny, when I graduated from FSU, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to go into communications, but through a series of events, I ended up in politics. And I started on the official side, working in different offices, Congress people, all across the country, quite frankly. And, but what I really loved was the political stuff. And I started working on campaigns as a press flack, as somebody who deals with the press for different candidates. And I learned so much. And I gotta tell you, the best training ground for crisis communications is actually in politics. And through a number of years and experiences and things, I kind of honed my skills. And then I kind of pivoted and started working for corporations. And we can talk a little bit about how that happened and why that happened. But at this point, I feel like I have kind of seen it all, but that's the thing about politics. They keep you guessing, things always changes, and it's always very competitive, and you have to stay flexible and on your feet, that's for sure.
Well, I'm excited to get a little more into those specifics. So to start off, what would you say your top 3 must-knows that we need to be able to handle in a crisis?
Well, if you don't mind, Samantha, I'm going to go with 4, the top 4. Here's a big one, and it seems very obvious, but you'd be surprised. Don't lie to the press. Just don't do it. It's not worth it. There's so many examples when people who lie to the press, you have to remember that the members of the press are extremely professional and they're good at their jobs. So if you lie, you're going to get caught. And then that just creates a domino effect of bad things that very quickly grow out of your control. And that's another big thing to remember about crisis. Even when things seem spiraling, you want to try to maintain control. So don't lie to the press. And then one thing that it's hard to do, but you want to try to keep the main objective in mind, which is to preserve the reputation, the brand, or the mission of the organization, or the candidate or whomever you're working for. And the reason why you want to do that, even when things are moving fast, is because you don't want to be distracted by some extraneous bit of information, especially if it has to do or surrounds an individual. A lot of these crises are born out of the actions of one individual. And so you can easily veer off course if you don't keep in mind what your main objective is. And that is to protect the brand. And then create a sustained way and be consistent about it of communicating with the press. Let me give you an example. Do you guys happen to remember back in, I think it was 2009, when the the BP oil spill? So behind the scenes, and that was an Obama administration kind of crisis. Behind the scenes, there was really not a lot that the government could do at that point. They needed to have the industry kind of deal with this. They were the ones that had the equipment, the expertise, the know-how. So they had to, but here's the thing about crises, is that a lot of times, even though they're born out of some of their element, the public expects the government to find the remedy. And so they needed to respond. In other words, the administration had to respond. But they were learning kind of as they were learning right beside the public in terms of how all this worked. So, but what they did really well was every day they would have a press event, and they would just offer up information, whether or not they had the answers to specific questions or not. They gave press access to information, and what that does is that buys you time, but it also makes you. It presents, or it creates a give and take type of relationship with you and the press. And it was consistent. It was every day at the same time. And that's a big, big part of this. Even if you don't have all the answers, create a consistent way to communicate with the press. And then the fourth thing, and it's a big, big thing, is security. You got to keep your communication secure. You can't have any leaks. And that's easier said than done, but you got to try. And, this is obvious. The smaller you keep your circle, right, the less chances of leaks happening. So those are the four things that I would say are very, are critical to crisis communications.
Honest and safe sounds like a good mentality.
Yeah. I mean, obviously with any crisis, there's things, it's hard to kind of create a plan and say, this is how it works, but those are just some best practices.
Good. So what did your work with Muriel Bowser entail? Did you assist with her campaign, or have you worked with her during her tenure as mayor?
Both. So Muriel Bowser, that's a great example. So I joined her campaign. She was a council member. And at the time, and she wanted to be mayor, as it usually is in DC. It's a very crowded field. So she was one of 8 candidates, and her name ID was sitting around 8% when I started with her. And there was a couple of things that made her special. First of all, she was a woman. She sat on the ethics committee. In fact, on the DC Council, she had created the ethics committee. And for those of you who don't know that much about DC politics, the city has had some problems with ethics over the years. She created a ethics commission, and she chaired it. And so that gave her a little bit better standing, but her name ID was still around 8%. So during the primary process, through a series of events, but mainly through reaching out to women between the ages of 35 and 55 in Washington, DC. By the way, her ward that she represented had the most super voters, what we call super voters, which they are the folks that vote in every election. They vote in every primary. They vote all the time. And you can guarantee that they're going to show up. So you make sure you nail those down. And they had been her constituents already. They knew her. She was really good at constituent services. That made a big difference. So by the time the primary rolled around, which in DC, because DC is a very Democratic city, the primary was kind of everything, even though she had a general in that November. But whoever won the primary, it was safe to say that they were going to win the general. And so by the time that rolled around, she won. Again, crowded field, about 7 people. And she won with like 18% of the vote. I know it sounds small, but again, we're talking about a primary. with 7 candidates. So she went on to be mayor. She's been really great. And I worked with her as mayor, but not on the official side. I still work with her on different initiatives she has. Like right now, we're doing DC statehood, which is huge. And by the way, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen now, or it needs to happen now. Because why? Because Democrats control both chambers. Also, over the past year or so, it's become very obvious to people why DC needs to be a state. So we're working on DC statehood now. Let's just put it at that. And I really, she's in her last term. Her term ends in 2022, and it's going to be interesting to see what interesting things come up for her. I'd like to see Governor Muriel Bowser, but we'll see.
Well, personally, DC statehood sounds pretty awesome,
Yeah.
especially being from that area.
Yeah.
But going on to more people you've worked with, what was your focus and purpose on Bernie Sanders' campaign? Which campaign term did you work with him on?
Okay, so let me start out by saying that I worked with him in 2016 and 2020. Both times he ran for president. So I am considered an Iowa expert. We all know Iowa, right? And the special place it has in presidential primary politics, right? And so I'm an Iowa expert. Now we all know that Iowa is the first state to hold any kind of presidential caucus or primary. Of course, Iowa is a caucus. It's very different. It's a very different kind of, and by the way, the Democrats and the Republicans do it differently. That adds another layer of uncertainty to the process. But it's very different from just going and pulling a lever on election day. And so it's treated very differently. So Amy, if you want to put up I'm going to show you what I did for Bernie Sanders. This is from 2020. Amy's going to show you. Okay. These are you can see what I do. This is what I do for a living. I create targets. So you can see on the left-hand side, target 1, it's our persuasion universe, 30 to 50, women of ages 30 to 50. This is a number that we attach to it. And then and then over here is the description. Now, this is not going to make a lot of sense to you. Okay. But if somebody wants to screenshot it, they can contact me later and I'll explain it. But one of the things that we're trying to do through the Institute of Politics is create some classes or some seminars that actually explain how to do this. So why do we create these targets? So that we can communicate with different constituencies on the things that matter to them, quite frankly. And also, it's not cost effective to mail everyone or call everyone. It's just cost prohibitive. So this is kind of what I did. And again, it's not going to make a whole lot of sense, but like I said, screenshot it and we can talk about it. But this is what I did. I created targets for Bernie Sanders in Iowa. And this is a moving target, but it gives us an idea. And by the way, GOTC is Get Out the Caucus. So these folks on the Get Out the Caucus folks are people that we know are with us. And again, through the caucus, caucusing is a little different, operates a little differently. So people have their 1 choice, 2 choice, 3 choices. So we know who's our 1 choices. So what we're constantly talking to them about is just making sure they know how to caucus, where they're supposed to caucus, how, what the process is. It's a lot of communication, but it's very strategic and it's very worthwhile. That's what I did for Bernie twice.
Very nice. So what do you think is the main goal a progressive group needs to get across on the campaign trail?
Well, this is my opinion. Being an observer all these years, progressives need a better way to connect to voters. Voting is very, very personal. It's a very personal act that people do. And one of the things the things that I tell my candidates are this. First of all, when I sit down and consult with a candidate, I want to make sure that they can answer the question why are you doing this? And most of the time there is a very personal answer to that question. And it's important to me to kind of make them kind of think about it, but then also articulate it, because that's what's going to drive them. This is not, I always say this too. Politics is not for lightweights. It's a tough process. It takes over your life for a finite period of time, but an extended period of time. And it's not necessarily fun. It's a lot of work. And people who do it, primarily get into it for the right reasons. But voters ask themselves 3 basic questions when they're considering a candidate. Do I trust him or her? Does he or she care about someone like me? And are they a good person? Now, a lot of subjectiveness in those questions, but what I'm trying to get at is that it's very personal, and progressives have had a hard time connecting on a very personal level. The other things that progressives are not great at is they kind of come at the voter with, I know what your problem is. Let me fix it. Conservatives have always come at it as, you and I share the same problems. Let's figure it out together. And that to me is also a way that progressives could try to connect better with voters. It's not easy. It's not like you could write a playbook and say, here's how you do that. But I think there is some ground to be made up on that front.
Mm-hmm. Very wise words, I'd have to say. So I see that you have experience with FedEx. Do you prefer working with larger corporations or on individual campaigns?
I prefer individual campaigns only because it's my safe space, it's my wheelhouse and all that. But let me say this about corporations. First of all, what corporations want me to do is what I do on campaigns, which is the grassroots kind of, message cultivating and bringing people into your fold that are willing to kind of fight for you. It's kind of that same, what they're asking me to do is trying to apply those things that we always do in politics to their needs. When I worked for FedEx, they were going through a very, very convoluted regulatory issue. They were trying to sort that out. And they were trying to position themselves through this regulation so that they could be more of a competitor to UPS, which is their main competitor. Now, the general public doesn't care. Okay, FedEx and UPS are fighting, so what, right? So what they needed to do was make it more personal, and that's what I came on to do. And actually they needed a lot of advice on how to do that online and that kind of thing. Now, what's different about corporations that I learned very quickly is that they have their first reaction to most things is, oh, is this legal? There's a heavy legal undertones to everything they do. So for example, my boss was the legal counsel for FedEx. And so there was always a lot of, it had to be vetted by legal. And I wasn't really used to that, but I learned to operate within it. And the other thing about the FedEx experience was, and people would say, did they listen to you? Well, they listened to me about 50% of the time. And, but that's all kind of part of it. And when we talk about big brands, preserving the brand, that was huge too. I mean, FedEx has a very, very powerful, recognizable brand. So that was always paramount into whatever we did. So there was a lot of oversight, I guess. That's the bottom line. But it wasn't totally obstructive. It was just something new that I had to get used to. But I'd do it again. if that's the question.
So you like new things, definitely.
Oh yeah. I mean, I love to learn new things.
So, what a more recent scenario, what is your take on the GameStop situation? Do you think Robinhood handled the crisis well?
Yeah. Well, I think that, well, there's a couple of things. And I assume when you ask about Robinhood, there was a couple of things that happened. They weren't allowing normal people to trade and that kind of thing. And their communications weren't great. So if I had to critique just it kind of off the cuff, I would say that their communications weren't great. And again, this happens a lot with some of these smaller operations, organizations, whatever, that, they're kind of just over here doing their thing until something big happens. And all of a sudden the very, very harsh spotlight is shown on them. And maybe they don't have the staff, or maybe they don't have the resources to respond as they should. So that I understand, but kind of, bigger picture, it's a little bit of a, it's very illustrative in the sense that people always tend to engage, or they have the tendency to engage in risky behavior that is not to their best benefit. And I mean, you can think of a lot of examples over the years, over the decades, about people engaging in risky behavior that's not in their best interest. And then when things go wrong, who do they ask to kind of fix it? The government. So that to me is kind of the bigger picture here. I do think that generally there's going to be a tech reckoning, a big one. When we talk about Facebook and Twitter and all those the social media companies, but also you've got the online, or the online betting, sports betting apps and programs and that kind of thing. All of that is going to be regulated. And when I talk about regulation, because a lot, you'll hear this in the news and people will be like, government's too much in our lives. Well, here's the truth. Government does not want to regulate business. They actually hate it. They want businesses to regulate themselves, quite frankly. And they give them every opportunity to do that until they just can't anymore. So my point is that the tech reckoning is coming. And as it usually works out is that there's a lot of angst around that, right? And then after it's done and it's over and it's in the rear view, everybody's like, you know what, that was for the best. So I think that's kind of what's going to happen, with some of these platforms.
Well, it should be interesting to see.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So going back to a little more personal questions, what has been your toughest challenge to overcome when working through crisis management?
Well, okay, so again, I'm speaking more broadly. I've been in the business for a long time now, and it's just how communication or information flows now. It's so fast, and that's kind of the biggest challenge. It's funny, because when I teach about how to manage a crisis online, which is its own little thing. But many times the people that are experiencing the crisis are learning in real time, along with the public, what's going on in real time. And so it's that in and of itself is a very big challenge. I love it when, like, at New York PD will, tweet out, okay, we know this is happening. Stop calling, stop tweeting at us, so it's very challenging to be able to try to keep up. And by the way, it's only going to get more challenging to keep up with the communications and how they flow. And that, you know what, and by the way, it's only been in the last 10 years when this has really become an issue. So, we all utilize social media for our benefit. When I started in the business in press for candidates, first of all, there was no social media. There was no iPhones. We had the internet, but we still faxed out releases and that kind of thing. But now people break news over Twitter. They make statements over Twitter, and that's kind of considered normal. So it's just the way communication flows and the speed.
So do you have a strong social media presence?
I try not to, but I'm human, and I try to, I'm like everybody else, and but everyone's heard this before about their social media presence. Just be careful. Yeah, just be careful.
Of course. So, have you watched the show Scandal? Can you relate to some of the episodes and the types of crisis that occur in Washington?
Sure. Well, first of all, so Scandal is a great show. And I would say this, that life imitates, or art imitates life. That's true. There's some storylines on Scandal that really go far. But when you think about some of the scandals that we've had recently in Washington, it fits right into the scandal plot lines. For example, there was a congressman, I think in the late 2019, a guy named Tim Murphy from Pennsylvania, who a conservative guy, very pro-life, and he had to resign because his mistress was pregnant and he encouraged her to get an abortion. Now, why, that's his personal life. Why did he have to resign? Well, the problem with that is that it goes against his brand. His brand was conservative. His brand was pro-life. So when that doesn't match up, the public tends to want to hold people accountable for that. The public does not. The public is very forgivable, or they're very forgiving. They appreciate, they know people are human. They appreciate honesty. They don't like hypocrisy. And so that's when people tend to get in some trouble if their behavior goes against their personal brand. But yeah, Scandal's got some great plot lines. They go a little far, but not too far, as I've just shown you. There are some pretty interesting scandals here in DC.
So, back to reality. What do you believe to be the biggest challenge for a rising politician in today's political climate?
Well, I think I want to say elevating themselves and their brand and all that kind of thing above, to a point where it can be to a point where they can kind of break through, if you know what I mean. There's a lot of content out there. There's a lot of stuff out there, and you got to kind of position yourself so you can kind of break through. There's a lot of talk about AOC, and she's very popular on social media. She's got quite a following, but the reality for her is that she does not have a coalition within her own caucus in the House of Representatives. So in other words, she can't really get anything done. So the critique of her is that she took some of her outwardly kind of facing ideas and rhetoric and all that, and kind of, pushed it inward, that she might be actually able to get something done. But I don't know if that's her goal, right? And so I think for anyone who wants to go into politics, that's the challenge. It's kind of, creating a brand or a persona that kind of breaks through. And, there's many different ways that you can try to do that. And obviously there's all kinds of politicians. Some are, more policy oriented, and some are more political just by nature, and some or they just have, there's just all different kinds. So I would think that's the biggest challenge, especially now when there's so much out there. And you can, and we all seen it. Some politicians make it their, they're basically in office just to kind of be in the public eye or to be in the news. And so it's just, and then, it depends on how their constituents react to it. Their constituents can also always fire them. So, there's a couple different tactics there.
Well, thank you. If you can speak to it, what do we need to do to hit a metaphorical reset button in Washington?
Oh, wow. Wow, that's a tough question. And I would start with by saying that, for as long as I've been in the business, there's always been this, over like this umbrella argument of we need to kind of lessen the rhetoric, the political rhetoric, and we need to be able to, come together and build coalitions and work in a bipartisan manner. And that works for a little while until we go back into election cycle. Right now, there doesn't seem to be a lot of benefit or rewards for working across the aisle. I've been in the business long enough to remember a day when you used to talk, you used to use your ability to reach across the aisle or work with Republicans or Democrats. And that used to be a plus. I don't think it is right now. One thing that we've experienced over the last 4 years, 5 years, is a breakdown in the trust of our institutions. Some of that has been has been thrust upon us in terms of it's just the way things have worked out, and some of it hasn't. Some politicians have steered us there, but that we need to start working on building back the trust, and that's very hard. That's not easy, but we could start with telling the truth and sticking to facts. Start there. And, some of it can be the pandemic or just kind of the general climate that we have today. But the trust in our institutions have really broken down. And that's a big problem. And it's gonna take up a little time to rebound from that. And I'm not sure exactly what that looks like. We'll have to see. But that's a tough question. I would say that, politicians need to start telling the truth and sticking to facts, start there so we can start rebuilding trust.
It sounds like you're just recommending those 4 must-knows.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
So moving on, are you aware of any internships or specifically virtual internships right now in the crisis management field?
Yeah, I do. And again, it's funny because I was talking to somebody else earlier today, and I was like, I know that there's these internships, but I'm not sure about COVID, and I got to check on that. But yeah, absolutely. And I can certainly put together a list, or somebody, people can email me or whatever, and we can, but when, crisis is a kind of an evolution from just communications. So, you kind of probably start off in just interning in communications, and then you kind of graduate to crisis. So that would be my recommendation.
A good starting point for sure.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if I want to get involved in crisis management work, do I need to have a degree in public affairs or political science? No,
you don't. I'm being honest. You have to have a college degree. But my degree is in neither. And I kind of found myself in communications. I was always interested in it, that's for sure. And I knew, I've always gravitated to that kind of work, but you don't need it. One thing about politics that's, I think, a little unique, maybe not, but a little unique, is that you really have to, it's a kind of on the job type of learning curve. And the best advice I can give anyone is to start working in politics on a volunteer basis, and then make yourself kind of invaluable. One of a little story I had when I started, I was living out west from like 92 to 98. And I went to graduate school out west, and I was working for different politicians. And then I came back east just to be closer to home and that kind of thing. And I wanted to work on a campaign. And so I started, kind of pounding the pavement, if you will, and showing up at different volunteer events. And sure enough, before, it took some time and it took a little effort, but then I was offered a job. And then once you get the job, then you really make an effort to make yourself invaluable. My father gave me some great advice. He said years ago, he said, whatever you're asked to do, and again, think of somebody who's just entering straight out of college, just entering the workforce, kind of as a new hire. And he said, if somebody asks you, your boss asks you to run around the office, he said, do that and do it with enthusiasm, because you never know, one day somebody will really need somebody to run around the office. And they'll say, oh my God, Kristian did a great job running around the office. So now it's Kristian, we're going to have her do this. And it kind of works that way in politics, because everyone has a purpose. And you always need extra hands. Everyone has a very valuable job, even if it's running around the office. So that's kind of how I started. And then I went from there. And then, by the time, I would say by 2007, I was kind of in a position where I could pick and choose the jobs I wanted and that kind of thing. But up until then, I pounded the pavement and I ran around the office. And I did the things that, I went wherever I was asked to go. That's the other thing about politics, especially on the national level, is that you kind of have to have that flexibility. And I did that for 10 years. People call me and say, we need you in Iowa next week. And I'd pack my bags and go. So, and then, like I said, then about 2007, I didn't do that anymore. So it's rewarding in that way, because you can kind of control your own destiny.
Since you have a lot of experience, what are the transitions between jobs like for you? Like, for example, when one campaign ends, how do you choose the next one? Mm-hmm. And what prompted you to start teaching?
Oh. So, the other thing that's changed since I've been in the biz is that there used to be a break. There used to be a break between campaigns. Now it all really runs together. So for example, now, we just came off an election cycle, and now we're working on 2022. And these campaigns start really early. So I have a couple of clients that I work for, kind of continuously, but then I also have clients that are just they're in cycle, or like, for example, there's an open seat in Ohio, there's an open seat in Pennsylvania. All of a sudden, those have become more important for Democrats. Obviously, Democrats really care about those Senate races in 2022, because why? Because they might lose the majority, the very, very slim majority that they have. So it's very important that they recruit the right candidates and they make sure, money's not going to be an issue, but money doesn't matter like it used to. So it's more important to have seasoned candidates and candidates that have been a little ground tested and who've also kind of have a staying power, not to mention their ideological positions, but also they got to be vetted. You know what I mean by that? You have to see if there's any issues in their personal life or otherwise that are going to cause problems. So there's a lot to be done. That's my point. So we're already starting on 2022. Now, in politics, for me, there is like a 6-month period we're in right now where they don't really staff up. But people like me, I'm helping do I'm brought on to help them fill out the rest of their consulting staff. And what I say by that is like somebody like me, but then also the media guy, the guy that does TV ads, the pollster. And then we, spend a lot of time developing message using those tools. And then you start your campaign, most of these folks will start their campaign probably at the end of the summer. And so my point is that there's no break anymore. You just go from one campaign to the other. And why did I get into teaching? So that's a FedEx story. So I was working with FedEx. Obama was in the White House, and they asked me, they said they were looking for an academic partner to work with on one of their labor issues. I won't bore you with that part of it, but they asked me about when they were looking to partner with an academic institution, and they said, well, when they started throwing out these names of different universities, and I said, well, if you wanted to get noticed inside the West Wing, you need to go to Columbia, because that's where Obama went to school. So I said, if that's what you're looking for. And so they said, great, can you set it up and all that? And I did. So we went and we met with them. And during this process, because I was kind of the contact person, one of the folks we were meeting with, a Columbia professor, he asked me, he said, are you interested in teaching? And I said, oh, I haven't thought about it. He goes, you'd be great. And so I started guest lecturing, and then I started doing like these seminars, these special seminars that they'd have that were very focused on one issue. And then over time, I was brought on staff. So it took, this was like in 2011 when this happened. So it was a while. It took a little bit of time before they actually gave me like a class and all that, but I really like it. And I'm always so encouraged by the good, smart, honest people that still want to go into public service, because gosh, we need them. And the thing about politics is that it's very strategic and it changes all the time. So you can never sit back and just, think you got it all figured out. In fact, I always say that it's like people who think they've got it all figured out in politics, they're going to lose. The public is really good about, slapping us down and telling us, you don't know what you're talking about. Not anymore. So it's that kind of thing. And that's what I love about it.
Well, you definitely seem like you know what you're talking about. So
Thank you.
I feel like you'll be prepared for anything.
Well, thank you. Gosh, sometimes, there's been time, there's been times when I'm like, am I too old for this now? Is there a place for me? But the thing is that there's all, here's the beauty of this. There's somebody behind me who does know more than me and who will take my place. And so that's why it's supposed to be. So.
Okay, moving on to the live questions.
Yeah.
What would you recommend students do now in their undergraduate years to set themselves up for a similar career in crisis communications?
So again, what I would say, if you don't want to go the political route, then just go into communications, public affairs or public relations, especially now, because things are changing so fast on the way we communicate. And there are a lot of ideas that work in whatever, both sectors. Politics is a little different because it's very focused on one state or one time frame. And one thing about communications that I think very much applies to each is that you have to be aware of when you're communicating. Communication happens in a like a snapshot. It's a very specific place and time. And so what works last year may not work this year. And again, that's why you have to be kind of on your toes. It's very challenging that way. So again, and right now, as we're kind of figuring out how to communicate and where to find good information or what information to trust, it's a good time to be in communications or public relations or public affairs, because you're in the room when those communications are happening, because professionals are trying to figure it out too. And, in 2008, 2009, Twitter didn't exist. Not really. It was around, but nobody really used it. So it's like, you have to, think of it in that way. And when, my daughter, I have a 17-year-old daughter. And so, I look at her habits and her go-tos in terms of where she gets her information. And so it's a very different, I mean, night and day from when I was that age. So it's a good time to be in the field, and it's only going to evolve. And especially when we settle into what is considered normal, or kind of the reset, if you will, it'll be interesting to see where that is. I noticed that my daughter is much more, what's the word? She recognizes misinformation a lot faster than I do. My point is, I think, is that she's grown up with social media. She's grown up around it. She's got a little bit more of a sophistication in how she handles it. So all those things are going to matter. And so I would say, you can find these, I mean, there's all kinds of fields are really good at this. Sports, there's a lot of similar characteristics, similar characteristics between sports and politics, by the way. Because it usually surrounds an individual. And so there's a lot of parallels that work, but it's a good way to get into, or it's a good time to get into these fields. That's my point.
Well, I'm glad you brought up social media again, because we have another question about it. So it seems paradoxical that platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, etc. are often tools used in public relations and crisis management. But now the platforms through which crises are communicated is the crisis itself. How do you see the PR and crisis communications business reckoning with these crisis developments in social media?
So, for every now and then I get a candidate and they're like, I don't want to do social media. I don't want to do it. I don't want to mess with it. I don't like it. I think it's destructive and all that. And the fact is that you cannot not do it. And as much as I feel like social media platforms are the problem, I would be the first one to say, you have to be there. And right now it's almost, whether it's right or wrong, if you don't have a presence and then, factor in the followers and the likes and the views and all the things that come with it, that's, used to, when I started out in politics, it used to all be about money. How reporters and the media differentiated between candidates was how much money they had, because what that demonstrated was how much support they had. That's how it translated. But now it's about social media. So, when you go into Bernie, before Bernie had the big bucks, Bernie just had a great social media following. And it really made his candidacy real in a way that we hadn't really seen in Democratic politics before. And again, in 2016, when he's running against Hillary Clinton, a very well-known entity, somebody who was well entrenched in Democratic circles. And of course, had the backing of the party. Remember, Bernie is an independent, and he always kind of has been. He wasn't even really a member of the party. He ran as a Democrat. But then all of a sudden, Bernie's reaching people in ways that the party had never really seen before, and that made him legitimate. So all that to say, we have to see, well, let me back up. So the tech companies, the social media tech companies have been warned, and now they feel like they're going to be regulated, and now they're trying to self-regulate. It's kind of too late. This happens all the time, by the way. When they really feel like they're going to be regulated, then they try to self-regulate. It's kind of too late. So it'll be interesting to see where the legislation lands on the regulation. I think it's going to be just kind of allowing these tech companies to be sued, and that'll fix a lot of this. But we have to wait and see what that looks like before we start trying to work within their structure or within that structure. But I don't think that it goes away. I don't think that, all of a sudden there's no more social media. I do feel like that some of these platforms will become less popular as new ones come along. Like my daughter, again, I just use her as an example. She's a big TikTok user. TikTok has been around, it hasn't been around that long, right? So, and she gets her news from TikTok and that kind of thing. And so it's not a platform that I really know a lot about, I'll be honest. But I do think that we'll see the user become more sophisticated, and we'll have to see how that kind of evolves as well. All that stuff matters. So that's a convoluted way of saying we have to wait and see. But yeah, it's coming. It's coming. And by the way, that's a very bipartisan issue, so it'll happen.
Another thing to look forward to, perhaps.
I know, right?
But we have 2 more questions left. Okay. So first, can you speak on your experience being a woman in your field, in the workforce in general? How do you advocate for yourself, and just overall advice for women leaders?
Yeah. So I will say that since I've been in the business, we've seen, quite a few gains with women running campaigns, major campaigns, women being in decision-making positions. And, obviously more women candidates, more women senators, more women legislators. Now we have a woman who's vice president. So I've seen that in real time. The best way, and I'm just gonna be honest here, that I do think that even now that it's more of it's a male dominated field. And the best way to set yourself apart is just to outwork everyone else. And it's one of those industries that kind of requires that. And everybody works hard, but you want to be the person that kind of outworks everyone else. And I know that when I come across younger people in my work, on campaigns and the folks, and the ones that I tend to gravitate towards are the ones that will just, whatever I need, they do. And they do, like I said earlier, and they do it with enthusiasm. I also run into younger people who have wonderful ideas, but they want to talk, they expect this, instead of taking the opportunity to kind of learn and execute within their structure, they expect to do other things. And in other words, they're like, I have this great idea, let's do it. And I'll be like, well, here's why we can't do that idea. And then they're like, well, I don't feel like I'm being valued. Well, that's kind of not part of how this works. And I think great ideas are good. And I think, and I think most managers and people in decision-making positions want to hear that. But there's a time and place for that. And then also there's some value in just learning. And especially in this business where it's totally changing all the time. That's the other thing. Everyone has a boss. There are people that I have to kind of, prove that I belong. So it's like, we're all doing the same thing. So it's just a matter of just knowing, kind of recognizing that and knowing that your time is coming. It's just probably not right now. I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense. But that's kind of my best advice about, advocating for yourself. And for women, it's a little, you have to, this is kind of interesting. So Robert Gibbs, who was the press secretary for Barack Obama, was my very good friend. In fact, he and I worked together on a campaign in 1998. And, we were peers. We were peers, and we still are. But he managed to, kind of rise through the ranks a little bit faster than me. And then, so when I went to Iowa, I was in Iowa in 2002 to 2004. And I worked a woman named by the name, you guys might have know who I'm talking about, by the name of Jen Psaki, who now is Joe Biden's press secretary. She was my assistant. She was like 23. I mean, and it feels like yesterday. And she was really good. And now it's so great to see her in that position now. But she's worked really hard. She's worked really hard, and now she's reaping the benefits of it. It's really nice to see her doing so well. So,
well, Kristian, I want to jump in, and as we wrap all of this up, I have a last question for you that comes from a strong woman leader that's on the call today, who is the president of our Alumni Association, and she would like to know from you, since you are it's about to be 30 years since you graduated from Florida State, and that's a wonderful thing. What makes you most proud about Florida State in those 30 years, and how have you seen it change?
Gosh, that's a hard question, because there's so many things about Florida State that I'm proud of. I'm really proud that I went to a state university in my home state. There's so much, about Florida State. I think it obviously prepared me, but it wasn't just the classes and the teachers and all those things that are very important, but it was also just the experiences that I had there, and the people I met, and the exposure that I had to different experiences. And then what kind of gave me the confidence to kind of go out. So when I left Florida, I'm from the panhandle of Florida, and my world was pretty small. I'll be honest. I had not really left the Southeast, to be honest with you, before this. So when I came to Florida State, and then I went to California to go to graduate school and did some other things. But I think my time at Florida State really gave me the confidence to do that, to make the next step. And it's hard to articulate exactly why I felt that way, but I did. And I think, and obviously I was open to it, and I was looking for that experience. But, once I got to Florida State, and this is not any kind of, it says nothing about not wanting to go home or being at home, but I never really left. In other words, I'd go home to visit, obviously, but I stayed in class. I did summers. I really enjoyed the summers. And that was kind of my, that was my home. And then, I also did a couple internships at, in the state capitol when I was there. And I kind of made that my home. But then, like I said, when it's time for me to actually leave and go I was able to do that. And for me at the time, going out West was like moving to another country, and I had the confidence to do that. So, and, I can't believe it's been 30 years. I mean, how did that happen? It, and the university has changed a lot, actually. It's grown, and, it's just gotten better. But, I really enjoyed my time there. I mean, that's an understatement, but I really enjoyed it.
And I think that we can all agree that how you engage today and what you gave back to our students today will probably build some confidence in some of them as they look to move on in their careers. And I really appreciate, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I hope so. Because, and I'm, one of the things I mentioned to you, Amy, earlier, and Samantha, is that I want to, one of the reasons why I want to do this so badly is I want to help FSU grads. If I can help, I want to help. I help a lot of people, but I want to help more FSU grads if that's what they want. Because, when I got into this business, I kind of had to do it the old fashioned way, which is just kind of scratch and claw and get in there. Right. But it would have been nice if I had somebody to kind of say, hey, can you help me here, there, so that's why I want to make sure that folks know that I'm here to help if that's what you want to do. So,
and I will say, and I'll thank you for that too. And to the participants, I will be adding her email address in the follow-up email tomorrow. So if you feel so inclined to reach out to her and follow up, you have just heard she wants to help. She's more than welcome to help. So again, I just want to give you a big thanks for your time today and for sharing your expertise with us, and even the Bernie Sanders work chart. That was a lot.
Yeah. And like I said, it doesn't look like it doesn't make any sense, but I'm happy to walk through it with somebody, and one of the things that I'd like to, like I said, with the Institute of Politics, we want to do more of that, like actually teaching people how to do that, because that's what it's all about right now in targeting. So, yeah. And so, like, I'm so thrilled that you had me today, Amy. I really appreciate it. And Samantha, thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. And thank you all for joining. And you will get the recording of this conversation tomorrow, as well as Kristian's contact information. And we hope you join us for our next alumni speaker series in March. Thank you all.
Thank you.